My name is Bastian Giegerich, and I'm the IISS Director for Defense and Military Analysis, and I will chair this second plenary session on integration, interchangeability, and innovation, a new balance of advantage. I think we had a very good start to the Sea Power Conference this morning, very strong sessions, very interesting interventions. And we will now want to turn to the issue of how to deliver on that promise of transformation that we already heard a little bit about in the maritime domain, about new concepts of what the balanced fleet might look like and how to make that work. The focus here is now a little bit more perhaps than it has been in parts on the technological change that is underway, what that means for the maritime domain, and even more so in terms of interoperability, integration across the domains, in partnerships and in alliances. You have speaker bios in the delegate pack, and given that we are pressed for time just a little bit, I will just introduce the speakers very briefly in a second, and you have their more extensive bios in your delegate set, so you can have a look at that too. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd just like to remind you that we hope the audience will ask lots of questions. You will have an opportunity to get engaged, and you can use the chat function and type up your comment and your question, and you can also, if you're in Arundel House, you can catch the eye of Nick Childs, and a magic process will start that will lead to me receiving a message with the names of those seeking the floor. Finally, a reminder that the whole session, including the Q&A, is on the record. So do keep that in mind. We have a truly fantastic set of speakers, and I will ask them to speak in the order that I will mention now. And if we can aim to keep it around 8 minutes each, that would be wonderful. The first will be Vice Admiral Nick Hine, the second Sea Lord and Deputy Chief of Naval Staff, followed by Lieutenant General Rob Magowan, Deputy Commander UK Strategic Command, Air Marshal Andrew Turner, Deputy Commander Capability of the Royal Air Force, Camille, welcome, Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO, and last but certainly not least, Professor John Caverley, Professor of Strategy at the US Naval War College. So fantastic cast, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Admiral, I'll hand over to you. You are obviously, or you are one of the innovation champions in the service. I think that's fair to say. So I'll hand over to you, Admiral. Please take it away.
Bastian, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And what better way to try and answer the question than Tom, please run the video. In a world where the UK faces threats from resurgent and developing powers, states and non-state actors, and a continuing threat from violent extremism, there is an undeniable requirement to transform at pace. The Royal Navy has arguably for many years set the bar in maintaining operational and technological advantage. However, this was only possible by constantly challenging daily norms, utilising emerging technology and striving to outthink our adversaries. The requirement has not changed, and so we must redouble our efforts in this space. By embracing integration, interchangeability and innovation, today's Royal Navy remains global, modern and ready, but we must do better if we are to continue to be relevant. So how do we deliver on the promise of transformation in the maritime domain? Maritime transformation requires a vision which is tempered with reality, but informed by the art of the possible and the science of the deliverable. But you need more than just a vision. Organizations are full of people who are either futurologists or individuals who deliver business as usual within a stable system. What the world is short of is people who are able to visualize the future, interpret what it means for them in the present, and then with confidence, deliver that change within bureaucracies which tend to be self-reinforcing and highly disposed to not liking change. Certainly in our recent experience, the early stages revealed organizational inertia, where success depended heavily on constant communication to reinforce the message that we really do intend to achieve this. It will be okay, it's safe, and it's exciting to go on this journey together. What we have learned is that change at scale, even inside an organization as complex as the Royal Navy, is possible and at a pace and scale that should be apparent. It's meaningful, it's happening now, it increasingly looks, feels, and is different on the front line. We have a long way to go, but we've embarked on a journey, and every day we try and accelerate the pace. To deliver a more thinking organization, we need to take more risk, reward challenge, accept failure, and be confident in the face of external naysayers. So what are the challenges and opportunities of dramatic technological change? The challenges of such change are well known. Many actors are embracing hybrid, below the threshold warfare in a way not seen on the international stage in the modern era. At the same time, there has also been a focus on nullifying the West's late 20th century supremacy in large-scale warfare, stealth, precision, range, and high-tech weaponry. But perhaps the single greatest concern has been in our adversaries' capacity to embrace risk whilst accepting that they must focus on targeted areas to get the most value in order to achieve outcomes. Think nuclear-powered torpedoes, hypersonic maritime strike weapons, cyber bombs, and weaponized drones in all environments. Put simply, their systems are driven by a competitive urge that historically we have failed to emulate outside of wartime. But at the same time, modern technology provides us with some huge opportunities. Technology itself is no longer the problem, no longer the constraining factor. The tech itself can solve just about anything. And whilst we might have pined for the old days where the best technology came from defense outwards into the world, the fact that much of the best tech now comes from the civil sector into defense is an opportunity to be seized. We have so much more choice. The cost should be coming down, and by embracing the best of global tech acceleration, we should be able to get it faster to the hands of the warfighter than ever before. Whilst research is undoubtedly needed, we should focus on the development part of R&D to optimize our outcomes more rapidly at greater scale and lower cost. So how do we innovate in force design and in the whole operating model, whilst incorporating technology and data-driven integration, transforming agility, and adopting new force integration? A new world requires a new approach, and as such, we began at the top. What is good and bad about how we operate, command, lead, change, and run our business? As a result, we have moved from a legacy model of stovepiped vertical activity to collective responsibility for all outputs. We are no longer about helicopter versus ship versus submarine versus marine. We are now all about outputs. Operational advantage in the North Atlantic, carrier strike, littoral strike, and many more, all focused against well-understood and ever-changing problem sets. But we have also recognized that critical to success in the modern world, we have to embrace best practice problem-solving techniques such as Scrum. We are now problem-led. We prioritize, we sprint, we deliver. At all levels, we are transparent, optimize cross-functional teams to get initiatives done at speed, and attempt to reduce friction by crushing systemic impediments to go faster. We are zooming out, looking at the bigger picture, and then we are zooming in. If you are not delivering a product inside 6 to 9 months, not the traditional defense 6 to 9 years, then you will struggle to get traction in the Royal Navy of today. You will simply be too slow to be relevant. We are learning by doing, we are showing, not telling, and we are willing to fail fast. All powerful upgrades to how we go about our modern business. There are clearly exceptions to this in some of the long-term and large-scale projects we have, but they too must adapt to deliver faster and better, or we risk pricing ourselves out of the market. And the we in that statement is all of us here at this conference. So how do we take the concept of a balanced fleet and make it work? Well, a balanced fleet is not a new idea. Nelson had only 8 ships of HMS Victory stature and many more frigates and sloops. So the obvious conversation around a balanced fleet being sensible and affordable whilst providing enhanced global persistent engagement has its roots in history. The mix of high-end Type 26, mid-range Type 31, and lower-end but still highly capable Batch 2 offshore patrol vessels should be welcomed. And in the modern world with today's technology, small does not mean irrelevant or incapable. but it's about more than the platforms. As we drive towards a pan-Navy naval strike network, which incorporates a mix of lethal uncrewed vessels of increasingly larger size, we actually want a force mix that takes in the high-end force as well as the lower end, working towards a fully autonomous major warship in the next decade. But further, new technology allows us to become even more radical with a modular Navy pod approach. We have always sought modularity as the nirvana of capability flexibility, but have never been able to afford it. So rather than design modularity in, we have chosen to design it out. These pods will be bespoke containers housing new ways of delivery in mine hunting, survey, air systems, communications, lethality, medical, and more. This means that all platforms have the ability to become upgradable with the arrival of a new pod. So what does all this mean? For the Royal Navy, integration means multi-domain integration. Our commando force is a new multi-domain operational capability spanning land, littoral, maritime, space and air domains, plus other government departments' activity, including several agencies. Interchangeability is so much more than interoperability. It means the seamless transfer of assets between our allies to achieve maximum operational effect. US F-35 jets on HMS Queen Elizabeth for CSG-21 is a timely example, but we can and should do more. Innovation means continuously challenging our today in order to remain ahead of tomorrow. We must continue to push the boundaries, be humble enough to get it wrong, embrace technology and innovate across every area of the Royal Navy, business and operations, in order to fight and win. From the seabed to space, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, a global Navy for a global Britain. Thank you.
Admiral, thank you so much for that statement and for bringing into innovation to the mode of delivery. Thank you for that. You spoke about how to deliver on innovation and how to accelerate and innovate at the same time. You put out that demanding task of turning years into months as the ambition, and spoke about the mindset shift that really is required to achieve that. The ways in which thinking about modularity is adapting. So I think lots of things for us to get into. So thank you very much for that statement. I'm sure in the Q&A period we'll return to these themes. If I may now turn to General Rob Magowan, who's speaking from Arundel House. He is the Deputy Commander at UK Strategic Command, obviously a command that has the mission to develop joint capabilities and integrate on the strategic level. So I'm sure you're all as interested as I am in learning more about its perspective and how the maritime domain fits into the thinking there. So if I can hand over, please. Thank you.
Thank you very
General,
much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me try and paint a picture of multi-domain integration. Nick just mentioned it there at the end of his pitch. Let me start with a real example first. So let's take ourselves back to 2015 and the Russian incursion into Syria to support the Assad regime. And what was their approach? Now, conscious of classification of this conference, but I think we can say quite a lot. We saw a rapid deployment of special infantry onto the ground in support of Assad forces, and that was deployed from the air. We saw state-of-the-art integrated air defense missile systems to dominate the airspace. That was deployed. It's still there. We saw missile strikes from the Caspian Sea into northern Syria, thousands of miles away. Why did they do this? Because they could, literally showboating. We saw the posturing of missile-capable Russian submarines from the Eastern Mediterranean. We saw the rapid logistic build-up through the Al-Assad airbase and the Tartus port of logistics through long maritime and air lines of communication. We saw the deliberate showcasing of unmanned aerial vehicles tagged to other assets to cue effect, including strike. We saw electromagnetic jamming of any military assets brought close to their joint operating area. And no doubt, they were developing an intelligence picture, including from assets from space. All of this was supported by a sophisticated information campaign in support of the Assad regime. Now, I want to talk about multi-domain integration within a maritime context clearly today. And I want to try and bring this to life. Rather than talking about multi-domain integration from a doctrinal perspective, let me try and draw a picture, a fictitious picture. Well, let's start with a scenario. So let's move 5 years hence rather than 5 years back. 2025, a hostile state, whilst peddling lies and disinformation, is acting aggressively against a neutral nation. And that nation is reliant on maritime trade. It's also beset with economic difficulties and internal strife, and is kept in that condition in order for the hostile state to gain access to its ports, for basing in the region, and to influence the nearby maritime choke point, which supports global trade. In a time of tension, the hostile state might consider disrupting the global trade that passes through the choke point near to the neutral nation, thereby exerting pressure for its own ends. We therefore need to monitor the hostile state's maritime intent and activity on an enduring basis, with the ability to orchestrate a coercive and de-escalatory response if required. So let me try now and apply the multi-domain integration so-called sense, understand, orchestrate lens to this problem. First of all, then, sense. Through analysis and fusion of open source, sovereign and allied military intelligence and strategic partnerships across government and internationally, we near real time observe the hostile state's intent to position maritime assets in the vicinity of the neutral nation, and using artificial intelligence and a synthetic environment are able to model the effect of the adversarial actions ahead of time and generate courses of action for how we might best respond. The monitoring of the hostile state's maritime intent is enhanced by the launch of UK space-based assets and the fielding of AI-enabled pattern recognition software. UK Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft and Protector drones are also deployed to a UK overseas base to gain a better understanding of the hostile state's abnormal maritime activity, whilst a maritime task group leaves the UK as a deterrent against the backdrop of a sophisticated strategic communications narrative. The base has recently benefited from a series of enhancements, including infrastructure and communications, meaning that it is well prepared to receive and sustain these assets at short notice. This rapid collation of the intelligence picture is enabled through the defense-wide digital backbone network, which joins fixed and deployed assets. So that's sense. What about understand? Well, the hostile nation has operated below the threshold of armed conflict for many years, requiring significant time for us to interrogate our legacy stovepipe systems and disconnected databases. This has given the adversary the temporal freedom to operate relatively unchallenged, with their actions difficult to attribute. In 2025, this has now changed. Up-to-date intelligence preparation of the environment can be rapidly collated using data collected by all domains. This enables military pan-government planning to take place with the fullest of local knowledge. The recent introduction into service of the MROS has contributed to the wider data set, which can be readily accessed by staff and commanders through the secret and above secret cloud. Through exploitation of vast quantities of data, which resides in Defence's cloud, the forward-based commando force develops and informs the picture. All this is possible due to the data intelligence standards mandated by our CIO, our Chief Information Officer, some years previously, in fact, happening right now. For the first time, cross-domain technology also enables analysis to identify, retrieve, and fuse data of differing classifications. Data collected across all intelligence disciplines within all domains against the hostile nation is used at a previously unimagined pace and fused within the single intelligence environment to understand the crisis and predict outcomes, providing commanders with the ability to design an influence campaign and change the decision-making of the adversary. These actions must be orchestrated and synchronized like they have seldom been before. And then finally, orchestrate. Our adversaries will not confine their actions to the geography of the immediate conflict zone around the neutral nation, and nor will we. To do so would ignore the ubiquity of the information environment enabled by the cyber and space domains in particular. Whilst the headline events of this scenario might be maritime in nature, the required persistent engagement during a live competition is a multi-domain sport, requiring the government to use all levers of power coherently to achieve strategic goals. The hostile nation, maritime and air forces would be targeted using the data collected and analyzed real-time by AA at the combat edge and within the single intelligence environment, including from open source. This will require command and control that can rapidly orchestrate land, air, sea, cyber, and space forces using the secure digital backbone, seizing opportunities as they are presented by AI-enabled analytics and queuing, generating tempo relative to our adversary to deter and, if required, fight. Mission data from all domains enables friends and foe to be distinguished, and machine learning algorithms will enable a near instantaneous reaction to any hostile action. This command and control must allow integration with other elements of government to exercise diplomatic and economic levers of power. It must also enable integration with our allies and partners. So, a broad range of courses of action will be prepared and developed, supported by modeling to wargame at pace, potential outcomes and consequences. The options will range from discrete offensive cyber actions designed to impede the hostile state led by the National Cyber Force, including disruption of their supply chains, through to a special operation led by the newly formed and equipped Commando Force that is already deployed in the region as part of the UK's new and enhanced global posture. The Commando Force will prosecute operations across multiple domains, if necessary simultaneously in order to overwhelm, ranging from precision kinetic strikes at range, including queuing F-35 from the carrier, to below the threshold influence options amongst the people. This is multi-domain integration from the maritime, and we have a tremendous opportunity to realize it. The threat dictates that we must.
General, thank you so much for these remarks, and I think it's a very useful exercise to take this idea and this vision of multi-domain integration and talk us through it by using a scenario and breaking it down a bit like you did. I think that was a powerful way of driving home what this is and will be about. Thank you for that. I now like to turn to our next speaker, Air Marshal Andrew Turner. Air Marshal, I'm sure you will want to say a few words about how the Air Force thinks about these challenges and the opportunities as they relate to that fairly dramatic technological change that we're seeing, that we're hearing about. So, Air Marshal, over to you.
Yeah, Bastian, thank you very much indeed. And Admiral First Sea Lord, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this auspicious conference, and in particular at this time, with HMS Queen Elizabeth out at sea, as a very, very multi-domain entity at the very peak of fighting power, flying the Union Jack and British capability, our defence and prosperity opportunities, at the very top of the flagpole. It's just a tremendous moment. I think I'll reflect on that as we move into lightning on the back of the Poseidon activities of last year and that will grow over this year. It is absolutely fabulous to become a maritime air force again after a pause of nearly a decade. So this is a genuinely really big opportunity for us to start to build the ideas that Rob has just spoken so eloquently about around integration. I mean, your subject is really interesting, integration, interchangeability, and innovation. But my first contention is that actually it's really difficult to conceive of a uni-domain act in the future. I mean, perhaps the only area might be through the cyber domain. And so I wonder whether the title of this section in this plenary period today is stretching enough. And in fact, because I think what we should be really talking about is interdependence, which is an even more stretching challenge in the interoperability spectrum beyond integration, deconfliction, interchangeability to interdependence. And I think this is an area where we might want to be thinking and talking more through the MDI lens, as Rob has so eloquently set out, as I said earlier. The second point is that if asked across this conference, what is your most precious resource? I think almost everybody in the room or online would probably say our people, of course. But I reckon if there's 100 people on this conference today, or even 1,000, there'll be that plus 20% would have differing opinions on what their second most precious resource would be. And my contention is that would be data. It seems illogical to me that we make any decision, take any act, integrate any force, move anywhere without control and management and the insight of data. And I just don't think we're organized adequately enough to control, manage, sift, and exploit data to the extent that is going to be so crucial to our future. My sense for this is that if we can protect and defend our own data, we'll be so much more effective and lethal, efficient and productive than if we were to have it disrupted. So one could flip that on its head and talk about an idea where you might want to get inside an adversary's data and information and start to disrupt them for a natural advantage. All of this speaks to this idea, though, that actually our role in warfare is rather more cognitive than kinetic. It's about influencing personalities, opinions, judgments, and choices through perhaps kinetic action, but ultimately to deny opportunity, freedom, and choice of those that we would will or wish would do otherwise. So this idea about data being, our second most precious resource, and the ideas around configuring, aligning, and organizing better to that extent, I think is really very, very much in our minds in the Air Force today. I know because I speak regularly with Nick and Rob and Chris Tickell, that is also shared similarly with you. So what of this sort of uni-domain world that is multi-domain, in fact, this single idea that is we're all doing it together and with each other. And Rob's work around defining common standards that Charlie Fortier is leading on is absolutely vital to that. So that whatever we do or buy, we're all in the same place. It would be my contention that bluntly, in the future, if you're not on the grid in some way, digitally connected to that grid, then you shouldn't be on the battlefield. It's probably likely in the very near future, if not now, that if you're remotely analog, you're a liability to the wider joint force. This is as much a reflection on a platform as a weapon as it is about an individual. An individual that can't report automatically its location, its status, and its desires or next steps is probably a platform that is a risk to the Joint Commander. And therefore, we've got to be thinking a lot more about how this interaction and interoperability of things on the battlefield, the Internet of Things on the battlefield, becomes a single moving entity. It's as much as a reflection that every platform is a sensor or a node on that in that data and digital system, such that if one element is taken out or removed from effectiveness, then we can move the onus of responsibility to some other part of the structure. So the idea for me is that this is a much more independent, communicated and connected enterprise. In our world, of course, Lightning 2 is afloat with Queen Elizabeth, as Nick has mentioned, with the US Marine Corps alongside ourselves as a joint force with the Royal Navy, stretching into the future, an out of service date that's way, way into the future. So it's a platform that we're going to be spending a lot more time working much more closely together. And we've got ideas about how we converge engineering and maintenance training, common certification and standards, authorizations, and the roles and responsibilities afloat. So we can operate from afloat and ashore with a seamless capability. And that, frankly, should extend beyond engineering and maintenance and into areas such as intelligence, administration, and aircrew, as to a certain extent, which has already been highly advanced on. Our ideas, though, extend beyond, of course, Lightning and into the broader combat air sphere, and as much into the future combat air system that some of you have heard about around Tempest. But importantly, and not yet enough in the debate, are the ideas around our program Alvina, which is the swarming drone squadron we formed a year or so ago, that should expand and develop in integrated capability, not just for the protecting the carrier, but also for the future commando force. And in some areas, one could imagine that a swarming drone squadron might be a very useful asset in an anti-submarine warfare, protecting the nuclear deterrent mode as well. The second part of the FCAS system beyond the crewed fighter is Mosquito, our light, affordable, novel combat aircraft, the loyal wingman, if you like. And if we could think of a gender neutral term for a loyal wingman, that would be a useful outcome from this conference. But this idea of this aircraft, which is uncrewed, which sits at hundreds of miles separated from crewed platforms with effectors and sensors, able to work collaboratively, to a certain extent is attritable, but ultimately is recoverable as well, is a tremendous asset that we need to be operating off the carrier, off the Queen Elizabeth class carriers, as much as it is in concert with all the other defense assets. So again, a multi-domain capability built and afforded but for the air domain, but operating across all domains at all times. There's many other things that we'll be developing through space, through the joint space hosted and space facing capabilities that the new UK Space Command will be fielding too. And there's a bigger conversation that we need to develop with the maritime sector that we'll be taking forward over the next few weeks on that and on that alone. But there's some other challenging areas of innovation around technology that we should be thinking about too, whether that's about the hypersonics that we've got in test at the moment that will be able to project things at Mach 5 across and around the world, which is broadly here to Australia in an hour or so, should change the geometry of warfare. Some ideas in quantum computing around gravity sensing and quantum key encryption will change forever the way in which we look and observe the world, find and hunt and deny adversaries freedom of maneuver, as well as protecting our data systems and core networks to an extent that is probably indecipherable for some time to come, decades, that is, not a short time. So I think there's some really, really important areas around the air maritime integration work that Nick and I have kicked off with the First Sea Lord and the Chief of the Air Staff, which we will be advancing over the next few weeks and months. The last area I'd like to just very briefly touch on, really more to seed questions, is that we talk always and to a great deal about equipment and technology in talking about interoperability, interdependence and innovation, and far too little on the ideas around the workforce and how we can be innovating with our people. So the journey that we're all on to move towards professions, away from historic branches and trades, the shrinking of our training packages to get more people biased to the front line, a different form of remuneration, which itself will allow different forms of service to become the defense security industrial strategy, a form of integration of the employed workforce in the enterprise, but oscillating between regular and reserve service and commercial and contractor service, are big ideas that need to be brought to life in Rob's timeframe by 2025. This will enable the workforce to be a lot more rigorous and robust, a lot more resilient and a lot more available to us at times and places of our choosing. And at the same time, we also need to be innovating with our infrastructure and estate, less of it able to be resistant to more electromagnetic threats than otherwise besides, and able to operate off our bases in an agile way around the world that is more resilient to pressure from our adversaries and more rapidly agile around the world in itself, right, whether that's self-generating power systems or battery backups for our networks in different places and beside. So there's a lot of different ideas that are rolling out and rather quickly. Our theory of change in the Royal Air Force is plagiarise, badge, improve. The idea is that somewhere in the world, what we were after is already deployed and being used. We just need to access it. And through conferences like this, we can access those new technologies quicker and avoid great, long, lengthy and expensive steps of ideation and creation and leap straight to the use cases, which are so desired and so needed in the way that Nick spoke about the accelerating change of our adversaries and the nature of warfare. I'll hold my comments there. I'm sure there's plenty more we can discuss in questions. But Bastian, back to you.
Marshal, thank you so much. You started by putting out that challenge of interdependence, which I'm sure people will pick up on. You put out the thought that data is probably among the top two priority resource. Most of us, or most people who do this kind of thinking, and you mentioned that at some point when you're not properly integrated, you're really a liability rather than a contributor. And then, of course, thank you very much for opening the loyal wing thing competition. We'll see what ideas that generates. And you close by speaking about how do we leap to the use cases as quickly as we can. So thank you very much. Very rich menu to get into in the Q&A. I'd now like to turn to Camille, who's the Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO, and obviously Camille will offer an alliance perspective that has already been kind of been in the frame throughout the day and been alluded to a number of times. So Camille, what is the perspective from NATO headquarters on the challenges across the domains, really, in this changing environment? What does that mean for capability requirements? What does that mean for investments? And if you can, touch upon the specifics of the maritime domain, that would be excellent. Camille, over to you.
Thank you, Bastian. Thank you for having me on this event, and many thanks to the IISS and the First Sea Lord for inviting NATO to join this conversation. It's really an honor to be with you on this panel. the program was really very fascinating, and it really touches well on some of our conversations at NATO headquarters these days. As you're well aware, we have a summit in 3 weeks. We're working on what we call NATO 2030, with a focus on innovation and what are the requirements of keeping this alliance strong, interoperable, and efficient in the future in a security environment that has, in many instances, is more degraded than we might have thought when we were developing the strategic concept 10 years ago. And so that is a very good timing and exciting time. Let me share some thoughts on what is driving the alliance thinking these days, with a zoom on a couple of projects that my team is developing that are relevant to our conversation. A number of excellent points have already been made by the co-panelists on multi-domain operations, the relevance of data, and all of these are well aligned with our efforts at NATO in developing joint all-domain operations, in developing an effort to focus our innovation efforts on those new areas and emerging and disruptive technologies that are indeed changing the way we do business, both in peacetime, crisis, and war. I will not develop on the strategic challenges that the alliance is facing, because I do understand that certainly in our own little house they are well understood, and so I will not expand too much on that. But let me just stress one point. We are facing a tremendous challenge in a moment where we are facing peer adversaries that have invested heavily in capabilities, including novel capabilities that are changing our environment and that are making diverse environments more competitive, including the maritime environment. And this is something that is something that we really must take into account. This is one of the reasons NATO has started this largest adaptation since the end of the Cold War, with more investments, more modern capabilities, and also higher readiness of our forces that is there. This means doing several things at the same time, which is of course demanding. One of them is to sort of build back a force structure that is up to the challenge of peer competitors at sea, as well as on land and in the air, and across the whole of a secure area of responsibility, from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, from the high north to the Eastern Mediterranean. We're facing a number of challenges associated with Russian assertive behavior that mean that we have to be go back to a level of readiness and an ability to act quickly that was probably not necessarily foreseen 10 or 15 years ago, when we were very much focused on our ability to deploy overseas for our out-of-area operations. So that has meant strengthening deterrence and defense on land, sea, and in the air, with multinational brigades, a stronger naval presence, enhanced air policing, and of course continued support to our partners in these regions. However, as we use our existing force structures, we need to recognize that they comprise both expensive and complex platforms, such as warships, submarines, manned aircraft, and these are high costs and long lead, and due to that, there is a reluctance also to put them in harm's way, especially when faced with new novel threats there. So the key there is really to have an effort in investment, and that's the whole purpose of the NATO the defense planning effort, that combines the investment in let's say pretty much traditional capabilities and rebuilding that force structure, while at the same time modernizing it and bringing it to the best standards in terms of interoperability, and third leg of this effort, to make sure that we're also investing in the future to keep what has been NATO's traditional advantage, which is its technological edge. So doing all three things at the same time is demanding, and that has been demanding for all force planners. And I can see that colleagues are nodding here. But it is, and often at times it's also demanding to turn to our political masters and say, well, we also need to buy spare parts while investing into the future. Of course, the spare parts part is not necessarily the most interesting for you don't put that on a T-shirt, but this is just as important as investing into those novel capabilities to deal with those current and future threats. So we've had this debates at NATO on cash capabilities and contributions, but they highlight the requirement for all these different types of capabilities, and also to look for less expensive, more resilient, more ubiquitous capabilities. So that means we need to rethink the way we do this, but also the way they are procured. And here I would echo a lot of what has been said in the previous three interventions. The way they are procured, delivered, and integrated into the force. So when we talk about innovation, it's not simply about new technology, but also, and there I very much concur again with a lot of what has been said, to innovating the bureaucratic processes that could potentially constrain the exploitation of them. And there, at NATO, as in any large structure, we can do much better, and we need to do much better, and we're trying to do so. Along this, there is it's equally critical for allies to develop new concepts of operation. As well as new organizations to employ them effectively. So the solution for this may not involve feeding exotic new capabilities so much as employing existing one in innovative ways, which is something that we really need to do. I really like the point of saying that that capabilities need to be fielded more rapidly and sometimes with a greater operational risk. So from this perspective, operational experimentation events will have a greater role to play, in my view, in informing that risk and getting the capability into the hands of the operator at an earlier stage, which is something that we really must be able to do. This is through operational experimentation that we have the opportunity to understand that the optimum force mix would be when introducing the new systems across the board. So impacts on cognitive load of operators, bandwidth, and data fusion will need to be understood as we move forward from that perspective. I would, on that point, really praise the excellent operational experimentation schedule of the Royal Navy, both domestically, but also with your contribution to major NATO events. And I'm very, very pleased with the partnership in one of my favorite project, which is what we call the robotic experimentation and prototyping maritime unmanned systems, which gives an opportunity to the biggest navies of the alliance to test together unmanned systems operating in a maritime environment, both undersea, surface, and flying objects in a maritime environment. This is a fascinating experience, and in which the Royal Navy does contribute quite forcefully. And this underpins a significant number of our new concepts and capability developments. And of course, the issue for us and the challenge is how do we integrate emerging and disruptive technologies in all of this? And here again, the whole point is not about technology. We don't necessarily want to be the Chinese of the 21st century who invent gunpowder and use it for fireworks for a millennium. But we really want to make sure that this is fully integrated in our defense planning and in our defense processes. This is the case for a number of allies, including the UK, but the issue of exploiting those new technologies is really critical to keep us to keep pace. These are some of the technologies that have already been mentioned: artificial intelligence, autonomous weapon systems, big data, biotech, hypersonics. I mean, all these could be game-changing for adversaries as well as ourselves, and this is really a reality, as I said upfront, that we should not take our technological edges for granted as NATO. So there is NATO ministers have agreed an implementation strategy to ensure that we stay ahead of the curve when it comes to innovative technologies, building on and supporting on the efforts of allies. As an alliance, we really strive towards being interoperable and interchangeable on day zero, which is again a new and extraordinarily demanding requirement, which was not necessarily the case where we were deploying abroad, when we would have a few days or weeks to fix those challenges. So this is a challenge even more for an alliance like NATO, because of course we need to recognize that we have a very diverse force structure. To echo a point made earlier, a large part of it is still very much analog and 20th century, when a growing part of it hopefully is leaping forward to the most novel technologies. In the maritime domain, it's a very complex task, however, and then we really have to, a series of work ongoing to develop the right standards that enable mission modularity and the transfer of command and control of assets between nations, with the ultimate objective of providing the maritime task group flexibility in the planning and execution of the mission. This is one could say a very boring line of effort, but that is absolutely critical. Having the right standards. I co-chair the Committee on Standardization, and this is just a place where really a lot of things need to happen, and we have to keep track of that. So it's really great to see the UK as the co-lead of a number of or in the forefront of many of these efforts, being a co-lead nation in our Maritime Unmanned System Initiative, which is something that I'm very proud that my division has been able to establish with the nations, and also the lead nation for one of our critical endeavor, which is the anti-submarine warfare barrier smart defense initiative, which is also absolutely critical. Both of them are at the leading edge of much of what I've just outlined. So this, to wrap this up, and there's so much more that could be said about those requirements, the new overarching process that will guide us in this effort, and that will be a feature of our summit in only less than a month from now, is this NATO 2030 concept. It is under development, and the proposals that are hopefully going to be approved by the political leaders at the NATO summit in June should enable us to consider security more holistically, and to place a bigger emphasis on innovation as well, by having new tools to develop the required capability at a faster pace. With this, let me wrap this up, and thank you again for having me, and really looking forward to the discussion ahead with the colleagues and the audience. Thank you, Bastian.
Camille, thank you so much for this excellent presentation, bringing that NATO perspective to our meeting here. You spoke about the challenge of building back while modernizing and while thinking about investments for the future, and the challenge of reducing the bureaucratic obstacles of doing these things simultaneously, and then how to integrate emerging and disruptive technologies, and the importance of operational experimentation. So and all of that in the context of that NATO 2030 vision that is forming. Thank you for that, Camille. And I'd like to now turn to Professor John Caverley, Professor of Strategy at the U.S. Naval War College. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bastian. Thank you to the First Sea Lord and IISS. It's really an honor to be here. I was given 3 mandates. The first was to discuss the challenge for medium-sized powers in terms of future force design and balancing national with partnership priorities. The second was to be provocative. Maybe what Admiral Hine would say, I'd be an external naysayer. So it's worth mentioning that these opinions are mine and don't represent those at the Naval War College or the United States Navy. And finally, I was asked to be brief, and I'll try to do that because there's already very good questions in the chat. I'm going to start by empathizing with Admiral Hine and everyone on this panel and in the audience. Innovation is hard. It's not, we don't say that often enough. It's really hard, okay? But what's very important to understand about innovation is that in the marketplace, and especially in combat, innovation is meaningful only in a relative sense. If everyone knew how to innovate, then there would be no innovation, right? Innovation only matters in terms of providing a relative advantage. And if everyone is innovating in the same way, there is no innovation. It becomes an oxymoron. Okay, so that's my first point. The second point is I'm going to start with a positive observation. Listening to the first panel, but especially this panel, and listening to all the speakers before me, there was almost no talk of hardware or platforms among the speakers. It's rather software, human capital, command and control, communications, data, the use of data, but also the operation in the absence of data, and so on. This is a really important and realistic step that maybe we would not have heard about 10 years ago. And I really hope there's some American admirals watching this. Okay, so that's my positive contribution. Now on to the pessimism. Okay, two things you have to understand about the Royal Navy, like any other Navy, including my own employer. Navies love technology and are offensive oriented. Now, I've argued in other fora that this can be problematic for the United States, but it's especially problematic for a medium-sized power. So now I'm going to share my screen and introduce you to a iron law. And Bastian, you tell me if it is working or not. Okay. This is an iron law of great power politics and also defense acquisition. Okay. Most people in the audience probably know all this. It's pretty intuitive, but it is worth repeating. Okay. First, if you think about building capability, right, you can think of something as being more or less ambitious, maybe range, maybe firepower. Okay. And then it comes at a cost. And it becomes intuitive that the more ambitious your capability is, the more expensive it's going to be. So everything moves to the right and up. Again, pretty intuitive. Okay. You can also arrange a bunch of different capabilities, okay, along this these two axes, right? So down the lower end are things like missiles, which vary a great deal, and aircraft carriers and nuclear powered submarines are in the upper right. Okay. Again, this is very intuitive. The more ambitious, the more power projecting you want to be, the more expensive it's going to get. Okay. Okay. One thing to understand is the things in the upper right hand corner are what Barry Posen and lots of other strategists call the command of the commons. This is power projection. This is forward deployment. This is protecting the international rules-based order and the like. And in the bottom left-hand corner, this comes under various names. Okay. The United States calls it anti-access area denial. Barry Posen calls it the weaponry of the close fight. The Chinese call it counter-intervention. Now, the thing I want to point out before going forward is that even though I put platform names on the diagram, okay, it's not just the hardware, it's the software, it's the systems integration, it's the training and operation that is required to actually create this defensive or offensive capability. And operating aircraft carrier is much more maintenance, research, operations, training intensive than operating a tank battalion. That's just math. Okay, so then we can draw a curve, okay? And that's very intuitive, right? The idea is it's not a straight linear relationship. As you get further along the ambition axis, going up and down, right? It's gonna take extra money to build that extra utility, that extra unit of capability. This is what Norm Augustine used to say, that the top 10%, the last 10% of your performance causes 80% of your problems, okay? So as you get to the power projection part of the curve, you're getting a flattening, okay? It becomes much more expensive to get that extra unit, okay? Again, very intuitive. Now, the second thing I want to emphasize about this graph, and then I'll stop sharing the screen, is that curves differ across countries, okay? Different countries are better at producing certain types of weapons, okay? Now, if we look at the bottom left-hand corner, there's almost no difference in the curves when it comes to defensive weapons. You think about something all the way at the origin of this graph, like an AK-47, it's basically a commodity. Anyone can build it. It lasts forever. It's very cheap, and it's very good at defending a very small range of territory. Okay, and as you get more and more ambitious, it gets harder and harder to do. Now, just to make it very clear, there are only two types of players out there in this market. The green line is basically the United States. It has the economies of scale, it has the operational experience, it has the defense industry, and it has the budget to actually build at the top right-hand corner more efficiently than its competitors, okay? So what does this mean? At the bottom left-hand corner, in that defense corner, you have lots of players and actors that can make the same thing and are competing against each other. What that means is you have a very robust marketplace, and Anglo-Saxons, we love a marketplace because it allows for competition, it allows for innovation, it allows for good value and a low price. But that means the defense is getting cheaper and better because of the competition. And on the upper right-hand corner, the offense, the power projection, is getting more and more expensive, almost as a function of the fact that anti-access area denial is getting easier, okay? And if you can think about it, it's not just platforms. Think of just airplanes, okay? The United States never loses an F-35 international competition. It loses competitions to the F-16 all the time. And then when it comes to crop dusters, training aircraft, and light combat aircraft, right, it's a very competitive marketplace, okay? So what does this mean in terms of international politics and innovation, okay? If you look at this curve, it's great to be a defensive-oriented state, okay? Things are getting cheaper, things are getting better. Vietnam, for example, okay? It's hard and expensive being an ambitious superpower like the United States, okay? It gets very expensive to build this power projection capability, but it's even more uncomfortable to be a middle power. And by a middle power, I mean places like the United Kingdom and China, okay? It is just very hard to compete at the upper right-hand corner of this marketplace that Admiral Hine was using as a metaphor. It's also a very crowded and innovative section at the bottom left-hand of the marketplace. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing. We'll go back to the talk. Okay, so what is a medium power to do given this iron reality of this production curve? Okay, there's two things you can do. The first thing is you can specialize. Okay, now the problem with that is it is painful to specialize. Okay, when I go around the world, because I do a lot of work on the defense industry and technology, I talk to ministries of defense. Everyone is smart in these ministries and understand they do have to specialize. Okay, but when I ask them what things they're specializing in, they all say the same thing. Okay, so again, getting back to my first point, if everyone is innovating on the same things, you are not going to win that competition. You're basically going to compete over a commodity market. Okay. Now, with respect to Admiral Hine, a blended fleet is the opposite of specialization, okay? It's the ideal fleet when you don't really know what your mission is, and that's fine, as long as you acknowledge that, okay? It's very expensive to build a fleet that is okay at all kinds of things. You may want to do that, but just know that it costs quite a bit of money to get that capability, okay? And our potential opponents are not blended. The PLAN in particular, and the PLA in general, the carriers are a very small part of their fleet. Okay, their mission is very discreet. Keep the blue carriers as far away from its homeland as possible and invade an island across 100 nautical miles straight. Okay, and other countries are in the bottom left-hand corner. They just want to be left alone. They look at the experience of Libya and they say, you know what? There's a lot of cheap weapons out there that can help me stop that. They're learning. Okay, so again, specialization is very uncomfortable, and I have yet to see a lot of middle powers that do it. The second thing is to embrace defense, which navies are culturally hardwired not to do, okay? Right now, offensive assets are forward deployed, and they can lead in the face of an anti-access area denial situation to what Wayne Hughes would call the battle of the first salvo. This can lead to crisis instability, and it reminds me a lot of the US maritime strategy in the 1980s, which I wasn't a giant fan of. Okay, I'm going to conclude, although I have lots of other things to say about innovation and interoperability. People want to know, is there any evidence for this theoretical claim? And do I have a positive recommendation? And fortunately, the same example can be both, okay? What's the defensive technology that could lead to a huge operational difference around the world that no one is investing in, okay? And it's the humble sea mine, okay? Offensive and defensive mining is, I don't know a single major state that's developing this capability at scale, okay? Quite the opposite, in fact. Countries like Japan are actually divesting of this capability. Okay, so it seems to me the lack of mining in the Western world amongst the allies is both a symptom of what I'm trying to convey to you, but it's also an opportunity. And with that, I'll conclude.
John, thank you very much for those thoughts. The point about how painful it is to specialize, I think people will have thoughts on, I imagine. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to go straight into Q&A simply because we are pressed for time. we have 15 minutes left, so I will group a couple of questions together that have come in the chat function, so I'll ask a couple of questions, and then I'll ask our speakers to respond in turn. If we have time at the end, we'll take up a few more. But let me start with a question for Admiral Nick. And it's from Will Evans at Oxford University, and Will is asking, the Royal Navy is rightly proud of its history and traditions as a fighting force. To what extent is this a tension when considering today's efforts at transforming the Navy in this age of technology and rapid change? Do you see that as a tension? If so, how do you manage that? If I can add a question for Rob and Andrew primarily. Ben Barry is asking that the vision that you constructed depends a lot on industrial quantities of data being carried by secure bandwidth, easy to disrupt possibly by old-fashioned electronic warfare. Do you not need a capability to fight unplugged? And maybe Second Sea Lord wants to pick up on that one as well. If I can ask Camille this question of you mentioned the obstacles that exist in processes, bureaucracies, in particular in an allied context, but several people have asked about how do you get procurement processes to change so that they can deliver at that pace that you have all in one way or other spoken about as being necessary to deliver on these matters. And then I'm going to ask to go to one question live into the room at Arundel House, and if we can have please Paul Rimmer ask his question live, and then we'll return to the panel. Paul.
Thank you, Bastian, and thank you to all the speakers. What I am interested in is some interesting points about transformation, but and this may be for Second Sea Lord. What sort of skill sets do you see yourself prioritizing amongst your people, and what efforts are you taking to get the right sort of skills to be able to deliver this transformed Navy? Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much. Second Sea Lord, if I can turn to you perhaps to lead off the round of responses.
Thanks, Bastian. So just to go back to Will, as briefly as I can. So Will, the answer is yes, it is a challenge, and I think it's a challenge that's faced by everybody on this call. From our perspective, tradition is not history. History is not experience, but we've got to take our experience and set it in the context of our history. And that history is one which developed the submarine, the aircraft carrier, sonar, etc. Sail to steam was hard. Analog to digital would be harder. And it requires a more thinking organization, in my view, one which thrives more on challenge and risk. We're really good at challenge and risk in wartime. We're very comfortable with it. And if we all subscribe to the era of constant competition, I think we probably all do, then perhaps it's as important now in terms of accepting challenge and risk. And that probably goes a bit to Paul's question, if I could jump to that one, on transformation. We've got to move our organization from training to thinking. We've got to move it from an organization that becomes comfortable with challenge, it accepts challenge, it actually rewards challenge and failure, two things which are really bad at. In order to do that, we need to start right at the beginning from our entry standards, the things that we're asking our people to do and think about in terms of their skill sets. And we need to think, as we change all of our training courses and our professional military education courses, we need to do that throughout the board to develop critical thinking skills, not staff skills. Staff skills are irrelevant. I'm sorry, that might be an army thing, but I can see no future for staff skills when actually I want an email or WhatsApp. And then just to jump to the conversation about that we had about challenge for innovation, etc. very briefly, and I'd like to come back to John's curve if we can at some point, there's a real opportunity, there's a counterintuitive opportunity to do something which is not innovation-led in terms of technology, but is innovation-led in terms of thinking. And we might choose to fight with the lights off. Rather than being able to fight with the lights off, we might choose to turn the lights off and then fight in the dark. And I can go into more of that later on if you want to, but I'll pass on to the other panelists to answer their questions.
Thank you so much, Admiral. General Magowan, if I can turn to you next, please, to pick up some of these points.
Thank you, Bastian. I can have a go at three of those questions. First of all, on the point Nick was making about transitioning to a new future, I'm also the Commandant General of the Royal Marines, have been for the last couple of weeks, sort of second time round, and just because we have a strong identity in the Royal Marines doesn't mean that we can't innovate for the future. We want to ensure that identity, but we've got the confidence to not hang on to every vestige of our past, but to ensure that we can grasp the opportunities that Nick's been talking about in terms of integration with into the maritime and integration more closely across defence. So we're proud of our history, but we see an opportunity at the same time, and it's getting that balance right, which is so critical and dependent on operational capability. If I jump forward to Paul's point, in fact, Paul and I were talking about this just before we set off, and here in Strategic Command, we have something called Unified Career Management, and that is about career managing and structurally managing cadres that we need for the future pan defence. So there are certain capabilities that are going to be required in certain domains, and that's absolutely fine. But there are going to be capabilities increasingly that we need to manage whole force, whole multi-domain. And I've written down here cyber particularly. In fact, we are generating and managing our cyber cadre in that way, in that UCM, that Unified Career Management way. We're looking at medical as well, in the joint medical space, the electromagnetic environment, the digital environment, those sorts of areas where you're kind of agnostic to domain, but they're required, and the ability to employ people more wholly is what that's all about. And then just to build on the point that we've been talking about, fighting unplugged or the lights out. Yeah, I think so, but we're probably spending more time making sure that we're resilient, that we've got redundancy, and I think it's pretty clear through the integrated review, the number one risk we talk about, and we were quite clear about this, is ensuring our own cyber security across all our networks and to ensure our data. So that's where we're investing. We're investing in ensuring the protection of our architecture, the protection of our data, ensuring there's resilience and redundancy, which is probably a higher priority than spending money and effort fighting with the lights off, which is going to be particularly challenging. It doesn't mean we're not doing it, but it's probably a lower priority than investing in that resilience. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Air Marshal.
Yeah, likewise. I'm going to just have a quick go at a lot of those quick questions if I can. And to Air Commodore Paul Rimmer, on innovation, the culture is everything. And I think the starting point is having a different cohort of people in the conversation. That's why there's such a big drive on diversity of our employment. And that's why we're driving at 50% women in recruiting and 30% of our Black, Asian, ethnic minority people. This is because whilst they're visibly diverse, they will bring different cognitive diversity, and different people who come from different ethnic, socioeconomic, geographic, religious backgrounds will aid and improve the decision-making that we will take on. The second point, Paul, I already touched on, is our theory of change is plagiarize, badge, improve, which means we don't waste time in that ideation creation steps. The third point is we have a 70-20-10 investment portfolio, which is we actively spend a proportion of our cash in the acquisition space on things that we know will fail, so that we can accelerate the journey of acquiring technology, which slightly leads to I think Duncan's point, which is about how do we accelerate technology and acquisition, which was in the DSIS. It's part of the command paper and is about an alternative approach to how we acquire big technology. If you're going to buy a carrier, 50-year latency is worth doing the due diligence and getting it right. I think actually, Jonathan, your dot for nuclear submarines was too far left on your graph. It needs to move right a little bit and possibly off the page. But nevertheless, you know, the ideas are big stuff. We should take time. The question is, should we apply the whole structure to all acquisition, or can we triage things and move them faster, because the latency of a cyber technique is minutes. Why would you have a CAD mid-cycle for that? So we need to find a better way of deciding how much diligence and oversight do we need on these different things. I can't remember who it was that asked the question about the past. I think it was right up front, but I think it's worth just reflecting that the history is the toolbox of the future. You know, as Twain said, it doesn't rhyme, but I think we need to find a way to draw on the past, but not to revel in it. We should commemorate and celebrate. We need to inspire and innovate about the future. And last point was about EMA. And Ben, your point about selective denial, Northern Ireland, the Serbs et al. You know, this is an area where I don't think we realize quite how critically dependent we are on digital systems now, whether it's for timing signals, communications, passage of orders, targeting data, weapon data, mothership to weapon interlinks and otherwise. We are highly critically dependent on these things now. The question is, how do we insulate and protect them through encryption and through shielding and screening? And as Nick said, selective denial of our adversaries with novel techniques that we do have and we are exploring through our Rapid Capabilities Office. So we need to turn the tables and use our adversaries' approaches to school and tool up for the future, because the future of warfare is not going to be friendly. It will be won by those that win, which is a self-evident truth. But that doesn't mean we need to abide by the rules of the Victorian era in the 18th century to secure that victory. We need to be innovative, adaptive, and highly agile in our approach.
Yeah, Marshal, thank you very much. Camille.
Very much in the same vein. You asked me about, how do we address the obstacles in our processes, in our bureaucracies to the procurement of the, today's requirement for procurement. Obviously, I mean, all the buzzwords have been used already, but developing agile procurement is not only a mindset, it's really also reviewing our processes quite entirely, by having more integrated teams, not having a system which goes through phased engraved in marble. Let's take 2 years to write requirements, and then 3 years to do the development, and then 1 year to do the testing, and then finally field the weapon system. That is no longer acceptable. Our processes, including at NATO, are not well fit for that. We all agree that it's important to accept failure and accept, to lose money, to win a lot of money over time, but it's not necessarily easy, and no one wants to go in front of Parliament, or in my case of my 30 bosses, the NATO nations, and tell them, oh, we had this fantastic trial and we lost 50 million euros on, but we've learned so much. That's not flying easily. So we have to create the conditions to change that mindset, to enable this, which means for me, a lot of it is about breaking the stovepipes, including in the NATO environment, where my communities, the armament communities, the C4ISR communities are a bit disconnected from the defense planners, or from the military, or from the resource guys, and we need to bring them much closer together so that we can be much more agile in addressing those new requirements. And one last thought, just to make maybe the case and prompting John a little bit on the case for medium powers when it comes to innovation. Sometimes frugality helps, and being French and today in a British environment, I think we can make a case where of course size matters, but being small can enable being more agile and developing some of the smart ways to develop technology and cut corners a little bit. Also learning from the failures of the bigger players, but that's just a short point there to make that point.
Camille, thank you so much. With us, you're obviously always in an international environment, Camille, so but thank you for those points. John, can you pick up on some of these? I'll have to ask you to do it in 2 minutes, though, because we are up against the clock, and you will have seen there are several questions that were directed at you in the chat as well. So if you can pick those you feel you should be responding to right away, then please fire away, John.
super quick. I just want to amplify what Second Sea Lord said. The ability to operate in the dark in emissions control and doing it publicly would be a powerful deterrent signal to potential opponents that think this is the central weakness of a Western military. All right, so in a way to get dumb or to operate dumb will overcome a disadvantage that our opponents identify us. So I think that's just a great point. And it does not really reflect the curve, as Second Sea Lord said. And again, as Monsieur Grand said, I think the United States can learn an awful lot from middle powers because it is facing more of the problems that middle powers have faced for the first time in a long time. The Navy is frankly fat and flabby, right, and exhausted from its operations. And it is the United States Navy. I can't speak for anyone else's Navy. I think the key is, and Monsieur Grand will understand this, the key is when a bunch of middle powers can actually cooperate and take advantage of the gains from specialization, which sadly, as an observer of NATO for many decades, we have not seen the fruits of in the way that we have seen in Euro defense and in transatlantic cooperation. But it is not enough to think I'm going to be cleverer than anyone else because everyone thinks they're clever.
John, thank you so much. And I'd like to. We are out of time, and there are many things we could continue to take forward. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and the next session will start in 13 minutes at 15 minutes past 3 p.m. in UK. So I'd just like to thank you all for your really excellent interventions and contributions. Thank you to everybody who contributed questions and asked challenging questions, made good points. Thank you for that. Those who are at Arundel House, I think will now get a cup of coffee. Those of us who are remotely connected will take a screen break, we will see you again in 13 minutes for the session that will look a little bit more at the economics of all of this. And I think that will be a fascinating session as well. So thank you very much. Excellent discussion, excellent contributions. I'll see you all, or we will see you all again in now 12 minutes. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.